This is for Gabe and BJ. What adjustments have you had to make as a Black athlete in a predominantly white sport? Who wants to start off with that one? Okay, Gabe.
But I was saying, I think that that's a question that connects really well to everything we've been talking about today, especially the questions I've answered. But I think in a lot of cases, the adjustments that you have to make go with things like the perception within the sport. I've had to think about the fact that things that I do, which I know are based in technique, are never going to be viewed that way. Like I hit everybody at the World Team Trials with the same move, and I hit it in both directions. And the thing that made it so that I could hit it on everybody in the tournament is the fact that I could hit it both directions. And that isn't something that gets talked about as a technical ability. It just seems like it's the timing to hit a front headlock or the timing to finish a double leg or something like that. But it also ties into the fact that advocacy is complicated, and you have to be aware of the fact that you coming into a culture that's different from your own is you bringing a culture that's different from other people's, and having to compensate for that to the extent that you sometimes have to withhold your culture, or you have to draw back on the things that they could truly understand about you, knowing that there will never be the kind of depth that you see among other teammates. That's an adjustment that in a lot of cases you have to make when people fill in the gaps in their understanding of you as a person or a wrestler or a friend or a teammate with their own assumptions. And again, not to parrot myself, but I'm thinking of another example where had there been more understanding, I wouldn't have responded the way that I did to a certain circumstance. But at the same time, like, I had to recognize that there wouldn't be that understanding in order to move forward. So this past year, I came home for Mother's Day weekend, but that wasn't the only reason that I came home. A kid from my neighborhood, a family friend of mine, who I had grown up taking to wrestling tournaments with me. We had gone on trips to Wisconsin Dells, he and his brother. His older brother is like a younger brother to me, and I called him my little cousin. I found out on Twitter at about 3 a.m. that a couple blocks away from my house that he had been shot in the head and killed. And I saw that not because the news had reported on it, but because his brother had found him at the scene. And so instantly I had to leave. I told the coaches about it. I told them I don't feel good about training for U23s for the World Team Trials right now. Like, I need to be back at home. I need to see my family because that's close to where my house is. And I need to go to his visitation. And a lot of assumptions came with that. I think that because there was a certain amount of gun violence that's escalated in the city of Chicago, a lot of people assumed things about my background one way or another. If I went to Stanford, there was the idea that I was one of the people at Stanford now and no longer someone who was from my neighborhood. And, you know, at Stanford, there was the assumption that because I was experiencing these things that they hadn't experienced, that my neighborhood was necessarily worse than theirs, or my upbringing was worse than theirs. And, you know, I had 2 parents that graduated from Northwestern, and there was no reason for them to assume that I was, you know, a first generation college student or a low income college student because of those things. But those are all things that are conflated as a result of them having encountered these stereotypes. And so that perpetuates that distance. It makes it so that in moments where you would like for people to speak out, the only thing that they have to connect with you on is the amount of your personality or your culture that they were willing to engage with. If all we talk about is music, or all we talk about is Jordan sneakers, or all we talk about is, you know, wrestling, even, you haven't ever gotten to know a person for the essence of their personhood, to the extent that when moments like these arise, you feel that inclination to speak out. It feels like if everyone else is saying it, it's a duty at some capacity. It's the right thing to do. But only the people who have gotten to know me as a person, who I've had to learn to be willing to have that vulnerability with, in spite of the fact that there's a pretty good chance that I won't be able to have that connection with them because of those differences. Only the people who have been willing to bridge those gaps, to ask difficult questions instead of filling in the gaps with their own assumptions, who have been you know, willing to have those difficult conversations like, are you doing okay after that funeral? Those people have felt routed to action almost across the board. And so I think that that depth of connection is necessary for people to feel that inclination that something is wrong, because the way that it impacts all of us is that we have to get up, and when we go outside, we got to think about, if we get in the car, our tail lights out, that could be a reason to pull us over and we could die that day. You know, are we doing everything right? Are we performing well in the gym? Are we performing well in the classroom? Are we performing well at our jobs, to the extent that no one would look at us and say that we're slacking off, despite the fact that things that could be impacting us from the outside that they wouldn't understand are informing those experiences. So I'm grateful for the connections that I have with people who have taken the opportunity, the time to bridge cultural gaps. But the fact of the matter is, the adjustments that we have to make often stem from the fact that people don't know how, are afraid to, or otherwise are hesitant to bridge cultural gaps in understanding, or experiential gaps, or are resistant to the ideas outside of those that they grew up with, or outside of those in the systems that they're familiar with or comfortable with. So those are just a couple examples of how I feel that we've had to adjust for a surface level, either understanding or conception surrounding our personhood and talent.
Thanks, Gabe. Thanks for sharing that. I agree with that as well. I think the points that you made about cultural competency are so important. So it's no question about it. Being a Black athlete in a predominantly white sport is difficult. And Kenny talked about it. James talked about it. Mark talked about it. But there's like another level of consciousness that I'll say you're gifted with in being a Black athlete, and being conscious allows you to be able to see like all of the issues and being able to connect the cultural, the socioeconomic, the philosophical, the historical, and the ethnic dots. And so within every ethnicity, there exists 3 cultural expressions. You have like C1, where it's people that are fully assimilated into another culture. And then on the other end, C3, where like people are completely culturally like inflexible, they're solidified, they're entrenched in their own culture. And then you have that middle ground where it's like you're culturally flexible and you're adaptable without becoming too much ethnically ambiguous or hostile. And so being a Black wrestler, it's really tough to be able to navigate like holding that strong sense of self and significance, but at the same time being human and wanting to be accepted. And so just looking at the raw statistics of the NCAA wrestling landscape right now, so there are about 71 Division I teams. 100% of those are at predominantly white institutions. And of those 78 Division I teams, there are only 3 Black head coaches. And then of the 312 coaches that make up NCAA wrestling, only 7% of those are people of color. And so now when you take, like we talked about, we all come from backgrounds that we're not culturally surrounded. We're not closely surrounded by Caucasians. We're the majority, or at least there's a greater level of diversity. Like now, for the first time, I'm being introduced to a culture or a setting where I'm the only Black person, or one of the only Black person. And there's definitely a certain amount of emotional labor that's associated with that. Because now that I'm the only Black person, or one of the only Black persons, like everything that I do is perceived like in a greater way. Like everything that I do matters in a greater capacity, because I'm almost like the voice of the Black people, in a sort of say. So, and with that, like in a way, like, well, number one, it makes you ask the question, why? Like, why is it not more representation of people of color? But it also, like, and it's kind of a double-edged sword too, because you feel accomplished on one end, because you're like, I made it. But on the other end, you also feel lonely. And so you're wrestling with this, like, loneliness, like feeling accomplished, but there's also a sense of loneliness. And that loneliness, like, in a sad way, but loneliness like in a like alienated type of way. So so connecting that back to what Gabe was saying with that cultural understanding, like that's huge, because like looking at my relationships that I have on my team, like a lot of them like were really great relationships. I had relationships with guys on my teams, and we were able to bond and connect over wrestling, over school sports, and maybe even like some social interest stuff. But it was difficult to have those relationships to be able to go to a deeper level, because there was a lack of education. There was a lack of those cultural competency. So within making adjustments as a Black athlete in a predominantly white sport, like one of the things you do, like I feel like I had to create my own support system in a way. It's like I said, it's very easy to feel like lonely and alienated when you're the only person that looks like you. Like I'm in a class, like for the first time first time ever, like you're in a class, like just from a school perspective, you're in a classroom where I'm the only one that has brown skin. I'm the only one that has this hair texture. Like, so I had to make the extra effort to connect myself with other people on campus, people within the community, just so I felt like I had a sense of place or belonging, so that I could be able to be successful, to feel like I was supported, and that I was able to connect with people that understood my worldview and my background and where I came from. And then another thing is that even within your selection process, as you're picking a school, as you're picking an RTC, a lot of times schools will use the buzzwords of diversity and inclusion to like get people like in the door, but you have to really do the homework to see if that institution is really modeling those points. You have to look at, do they have people of color in positions of leadership? Like, do they have other people of color on the team? And if not, like I think it's important to ask the question why, because it's not like I don't see a reason why they shouldn't be. So I would be really interested to know why there isn't, if people can answer that question. And then, like I talked about that emotional labor piece, like it's really difficult to understand, or even to put into words, the emotional labor that comes with so many times you walk into a gymnasium or a room and you're the only person of color, or you can count them on your hand, how many people of color are there. So within a team setting, like these are my teammates, I care about these guys. Like you have to really be quick to try to find similarities, to kind of find some kind of common ground that connects you guys. When our counterparts are Caucasian guys, if the team's mostly white, they don't have to do that. They don't have to work as hard to be able to try to build relationships and be able to connect, because that connection is already kind of innately there. And then finally, I would say just in the way you communicate, there's got to be an adjustment too. Just in your verbiage and your vernacular, and just in the way you present yourself, because it's very easily, like if you're speaking with emotion, for a black man to be perceived, oh, he's just an angry black guy. Whereas if it's a Caucasian guy, it's like, oh, he's just very passionate and he's very committed. So it's learning that tone switch and how to be able to communicate and how to present yourself as a professional, as somebody of dignity, and just really being above reproach in everything that you do.
Thank you both for that.
Yeah, I got a couple things I'd like to add to that, as far as the adjustments that I had to make being a black athlete. You know, I grew up in the 70s, and my elementary school was all black, right? And so I got bused. We got bused to an all-white school my 7th grade year. And it was kind of, you guys know the movie Remember the Titans, right? That's kind of my life, right? And so we got bused to this all-white school, and these kids, you know, very prejudiced kids, and then had signs, you know, stay out, don't want you here. And so it was a serious adjustment to go into this school when they didn't want you, right? So it was like serious culture change, and you had to learn, you know, I had to learn more about their culture too. You know, I had to learn about, you know, things they liked, they wanted, you know, things that they was passionate about. You know, so growing up in an all-black elementary school. That was a serious adjustment. You know, I wrestled early, and so that kind of gave me some experiences around white kids. Like a lot of the kids that I went to school with didn't wrestle, and so they didn't have those experiences. You know, I'd already been around a lot of white kids just from wrestling. So we went to this, when we got bused to school, it was like serious prejudiced kids. And so a lot of the black kids were prejudiced too. And so just trying to bridge that gap and learn each other's culture was just an amazing thing. And really, sport was what really kind of bridged that gap and brought us together and made us, you know, understand more about each other. I mean, I remember kids, you know, this one kid, we played football together, right? And I bumped him 21 times. He dropped his billfold, and the KKK card came out of his wallet. I'm like, and we've been hanging. This is my boy, right? We've been hanging. White kid. I'm like, Chris, what is that? He's like, oh, that belongs to my dad. It's my dad's card. I'm like, what? I was really, really upset. And he said, man, my dad's been lying to me. He's been lying to me all this time, saying that black people were lazy and you guys were dirty and nasty and stupid. He's like, man, you dress better than everybody. You're the hardest working kid on the team. You're smarter than everyone in the classroom. So my parents have been lying to me all this time. We fuss all the time because I'm trying to tell them, Dad, they're not like that. They're not like that. But there was a lot of kids that had that story. A lot of kids where their parents were telling them that, black people were just, was the dirtiest people. And so that's why hate is taught, man, because these kids that they grew up and they just were taught that. I mean, and we all know that, hate and racism is taught. You don't just come out, racist, so that's, but I had to learn more about their culture than they had to learn about mine. So it's kind of a cross section of experiences that kind of brought us together.
Kind of to sum that up, I would say the reduction of the black experience to being something that could at like any capacity be thought of as simple is what sometimes complicates things. And the willingness of people to bridge those gaps is the thing that makes a lot of parts of our sport beautiful. The unity that can come from that is something that absolutely can't be overstated, because without it, Oak Park wouldn't have worked as a team. Without it, even Stanford wouldn't have been able to do what we were able to do. But the thing that a lot of people who are watching this are going to have to understand is that there are only so many ways so many new ways that you can connect with a person without making the effort to do that. Even if it's somebody that you feel really close to or really connected to organically, as long as there's that distance, that unity can't be achieved. So being willing to listen, being willing to learn, being willing to accept that there are things that you might not understand at the beginning of interactions with people who don't look like you is not only something that's necessary for all of us to move forward, but it's something that I think that everybody in this Zoom call at some capacity has had to learn in order to be able to transcend the sport to the degree that they have.